What's going on, everyone? Mr. Octagonal here. Now we are back with our 3 Minutes on the Clock podcast. This is the 5th episode. So far, we've done 3 NFL mock drafts, but what you guys don't know yet is my personal big board. So the next 2 podcasts will be going over my big board. Today, we'll be focusing on the offensive side of the football, and then next week, assuming the next podcast is next week, we will be focusing on the defensive side of the ball. So without further ado, let's get right into it. How I'm doing this is I'm ranking 10 quarterbacks, 10 running backs, 10 receivers, 5 tight ends, and 10 offensive linemen. We have a projection of where I think they will go, and then Ox projection is where I think they should go. So my number 10 quarterback is Jarrett Stidham from Auburn. At the beginning of the season, it sounded like that Stidham was going to be a first-round pick. However, he sort of dropped off a little bit and is likely going to be a high day 3 pick. Taking a look at him, I would say he's a solid passer. He's pretty accurate, and he has a solid arm strength. Not great, but not terrible. But he's really bad under pressure. He's not great in big situations. And when the pocket collapses, he has trouble scrambling. He can run a little bit, but he's not great at it. But when he's under pressure, he's certainly not good. Not great at throwing on the run. And he needs to have a good offensive line around him. And when he's not under pressure, he can make a lot of better plays. So overall, I think he's a solid thrower, pretty accurate, but if he can work on his running ability, work on how to scramble away from the pocket and not suck when he is under pressure, then I think he can become a reasonable quarterback in this league. My 9th ranked quarterback is Will Grier. I believe he will go in the 2nd round. However, I grade him as a 4th round prospect. I'm not high on Will Grier at all compared to other people. Looking at him, he's pretty accurate, and he's much better under pressure than Jarrett Stidham is. However, I don't like Will Grier's upside because he's not incredibly mobile, and he has a pretty weak arm compared to the other NFL draft prospects, and he has a wonky throwing motion. So, in conclusion, I think he has a low floor, and I think he can be below average, maybe starting quarterback in the NFL at best, which is why he's so low, because the guys above him I think have higher ceilings. Maybe someone like an Easton Stick won't be as good, but he has a better ceiling than Will Grier, and that's why I have him ranked so low. My number 8 quarterback is Easton Stick out of North Dakota State. I want to say he's the only FCS player on this offensive big board. Maybe on defense we'll see some like Nasir Adderley. But looking at Stick, he has a somewhat similar skill set to former North Dakota State quarterback Carson Wentz. I would say the only big difference is their arm, as Wentz has a much better arm than Easton Stick. Stick is pretty accurate, but he doesn't have a super strong arm, sort of like Will Grier. He lacks big power, he lacks velocity, and I think that could be a pretty big problem, but if he can make some plays with his legs and his athleticism, I think he could be a pretty good quarterback in this league. I have him going in rounds 3 to 5, which I think is reasonable, since I think he should go in rounds 3 or 4, and he could be a pretty solid gem for a team looking for a good quarterback. My number 7 ranked quarterback is Clayton Thorson from Northwestern. Thorson is pretty solid at everything. There's not one thing he's particularly great at, but there's also not that thing that he's bad at. He has a solid arm strength, not great, but not as bad as like Will Grier or even Easton Stick, but he also doesn't have the arm of DWAYNE Haskins. He's pretty accurate, he's pretty mobile, and he has some solid college production, not as productive as like Will Grier, but he's been a good player for the Northwestern Wildcats. I do think he had an ACL injury in the past, which is a little bit scary, but he gives you the complete package. It's just that he's not particularly good at everything, and if he can learn how to become more accurate, how to be better in the pocket, I think he could be a pretty good quarterback. My number 6 quarterback is Ryan Finley from North Carolina State. Finley is a very weird prospect in my opinion, as he has experience. He's older than most of the quarterbacks in this year's draft class, and I think he could be a pretty solid player right away. However, I'm not sold on his upside, sort of like Will Grier. Finley has a very below average arm. He's pretty accurate, but he has pretty good throwing motion. He's solid on the run. He's not spectacular, but he's also not bad. I think he could be a pretty good quarterback right away, but in 5 years, I don't think he'll be much better than he already is, which I think is my big concern with him. But a team that's desperate for a starting quarterback, like maybe, let's say, Jacksonville doesn't draft a quarterback at 7 or doesn't sign someone for some odd reason, they could go Finley in the 2nd round, and I think he could be an okay starter right away. I'm just not sold on his ceiling. My number 5 quarterback is Tyree Jackson from Buffalo. I'm very high on Jackson, and he's one of my favorite prospects in this year's draft. He sort of has a Patrick Mahomes build, where he's a big, stocky guy. He is a cannon of an arm. Tyree Jackson debatably is the strongest arm in this year's draft. And he's also somewhat mobile as well. He's a big guy. He's around 6'6", 6'7", 240 pounds. And he just makes you think quarterback. My only problem with him is he needs to be a little bit better of a decision maker. He's not super accurate, and he didn't play the best of competition in the MAC. But he played better competition than, say, Easton Stick did. And I really like Jackson as a prospect, and I have him higher than guys like Ryan Finley, like Will Grier, who most people would probably rank ahead of Jackson. I don't think Jackson will be drafted on day 2, and obviously not in the 1st round. But I think he should go in the 2nd round because I really like his upside, and I think he can be a really solid starting quarterback in the NFL. My number 4 quarterback is Drew Lock from Missouri. He's been very hyped up for a while, and during the season, he sort of lived up to the expectations. He's a little bit inconsistent at times, which I think is my biggest issue with him. He's pretty accurate. He has good physical tools. He has solid arm strength. He's not great when it comes to deep balls. But other than that, I think he is a pretty good player. I expect him to be a 1st round pick, and I think he should go in the late 1st, early 2nd round area. Maybe a team like New England who is starting to need a quarterback. Maybe they could pull the trigger on Lock. I know John Elway really likes Drew Lock, so the Broncos could go with him at 10. But out of the projected 1st round quarterbacks, I do think Lock is the worst. But he's better than all the other quarterbacks. At number 3, I have Daniel Jones from Duke. Jones has a pretty good arm, and he's a solid runner. But he is also very inconsistent, I feel like. And he had a lot of flashes at Duke, such as the bowl game against Temple. But he also had some games where he wasn't really that effective. I expect Jones to go in the top 15. I have had him going to Washington twice, and then I think I've had him going to Denver once as well in my 3 mock drafts, so I do think he will be a somewhat high pick. And I think he is pretty deserving of that high pick. I don't think he's the best quarterback in this draft class, but I do think he has the chance to be a really solid starting quarterback in this league. Number 2, we have Kyler Murray from Oklahoma. Murray is, without a doubt, the most intriguing and most interesting prospect in this draft class. Of course, he did win the Heisman Trophy, and he had a very good year at Oklahoma. But at the same time, he also has a lot of money on the table if he chooses to play baseball. Of course, he was drafted with the 9th overall pick by the Oakland A's, and that signing bonus is pretty juicy. Murray did decide to declare for the NFL draft, but he also seems very wishy-washy on his decision and could back out. Well, he can't back out, but he could decide to just focus on baseball after being drafted, which is one of the bigger risks with Kyler Murray. Obviously, he's a phenomenal runner. He's not the biggest guy in the world at all, only 5'10", and I'm very curious to see what his measurables are at the scouting combine. He has a pretty good arm. It's nothing to say wow about, but at the same time, it's also not super bad. But obviously, the biggest part of his game is running the football, and he is very athletic, and he has a lot of upside, but at the same time, he's small, he doesn't have the greatest arm, and he may choose to play baseball. My number 1 quarterback in this draft class is Dwayne Haskins. I expect him to go top 10. If anyone, like the Giants or the Jaguars, trade up, he will go in the top 5, but if not, then he'll definitely go in the top 10 to one of those teams. Haskins, in my opinion, is a better version of Jarrett Stidham, a much better version of Stidham, with a lot more upside. Haskins has a really good arm. He doesn't have the arm strength that Tyree Jackson does, but he still has a pretty strong arm, and he's much more accurate than Tyree Jackson. He's pretty mobile, but his big weakness, like Stidham, is when he's under pressure, he's not great, which could be bad for, like, the Giants, as the Giants don't have a great offensive line, so that fit could be a little bit questionable, but if the Giants get a good offensive line, make some moves this offseason in free agency and in the draft, and redshirt Haskins for a year, I think that could make a lot of sense. I like Haskins as a prospect more than any of the quarterbacks in last year's draft. My number one quarterback headed into the draft was Josh Allen, and I do think Haskins is a little bit better than Allen. My number 10 running back is L.J. Scott from Michigan State. Scott showed a lot of flashes with the Spartans that he could be a very good running back, but he has a lot of inconsistency, and he has missed a decent amount of time with injuries, as I don't know if he's ever played a full season with the Spartans, which I think is his biggest concern, staying on the field. And when he is on the field, he can be a very productive player. He doesn't have the patience or the vision that a Le'Veon Bell has, but he's pretty elusive, pretty creative, and he's always been a productive running back for the Spartans. Never over 1,000 yards, but he's been quite close. As a sophomore, he ran for 994, so he basically got 1,000 yards as a sophomore. He's always been productive for Michigan State, but he's never been a superstar, which I don't think he ever will be in the NFL. But he could be a good short yardage back, 4th and goal at the 2-yard line. You get it to him, and chances are you're getting the score. At number 9, we have Miles Sanders from Penn State. He's very agile, and he's pretty good with the ball in his hands. He's not like a short yard guy. He's not super powerful like an L.J. Scott. He's also not a super big play guy. He's sort of a happy medium where he's a solid running back. He can be a bell cow running back if he lives up to his potential, but he's not that big play guy either. He's also very involved in the passing game, sort of like Saquon Barkley, former Penn State running back, has been in the NFL. And if he can be good in the pass and the run with his elusiveness, I think he could be a good player in this league. My number 8 running back is Darrell Henderson from Memphis. He's definitely not a particularly big guy. I want to say he's around 5'8", 5'9", but he's very elusive, he's very athletic, and he's very fast. So overall, I don't think he's that guy who you want to hand it off on 4th and 1. He's not particularly powerful, not the most strong, but at the same time, he's not necessarily weak either. He can break some tackles, but the thing I like about him most is his elusiveness, his agility, and his ability to make big plays, which I don't see in L.J. Scott or Miles Sanders, which is the main reason why Henderson's ahead of both of them. Number 7 guy is Justice Hill from Oklahoma State. He's very similar to Darrell Henderson, where they're both small, but yet they're both very explosive, which I think is the best part of Hill's game. He's explosive, he's elusive, he's pretty quick, he can make big plays, but like Henderson, obviously, he's not that guy who's going to muscle his way for gains. He's that type of guy who's going to get by defenders, juke them, spin move, whatever you got to do, instead of trucking them and sort of making plays with contact, but rather with his agility and his elusiveness, which I think is the best part of his game. I don't know if he can be a bell cow back because he's not the biggest guy, but he could be a good change of pace guy if you're looking for a big play. He can make an impact on the passing game, which is also good, and overall, he's prone to make a big play every time he steps on the field. Number 6 running back is Bryce Love from Stanford, and the talent is definitely there. He is a great player, phenomenal junior season, and was pegged as one of the favorites to win the Heisman Trophy this season. However, inconsistency and durability issues prevented that. He's coming off an ACL tear. He is recovering quite quickly, but obviously an ACL tear is certainly scary, and his durability is definitely his biggest concern. Staying on the field is not easy, but when he's on the field, he is a game changer. He proved that at Stanford. He's super elusive, can make big plays, but if he can just stay on the field, he can do that, but that's certainly his biggest weakness, and his injuries are sort of a red flag. At number 5, we have Benny Snell from the Kentucky Wildcats, and Snell is a somewhat different player from the past few guys we've been looking at. He's bigger, he's more powerful, more stronger. He's a much better pass protector than all 3 of the past 3 guys we looked at, Henderson, Hill, and Love. The college production is certainly there, as Benny Snell is one of the best running backs in the country the past few seasons, and was one of the biggest reasons why Kentucky was as good as they were this year. He needs to work on his quickness. He's not as athletic as someone like a Darrell Henderson or like a Bryce Love, but at the same time, he was phenomenal in college, taking on SEC defenses, and if he can translate his game to the pros, he could be a really good player. And number 4 running back is Rodney Anderson from Oklahoma. As Anderson is a complete package, he's pretty elusive, but he also has a lot of power, and he's also quite an athlete as well. But his biggest concern, sort of like Bryce Love, is durability. Anderson did tear his ACL in week 1 of the college football season against UCLA, which is obviously a pretty big concern as he did not return for the rest of the season. But the production certainly there, as he had a huge sophomore season and was playing pretty well against UCLA and Florida Atlantic before tearing his knee, as he averaged almost 11 yards a carry in the limited time this past season. If he can recover from his knee injury and translate his amazing skills from college into the NFL, I think he could be a really good diamond in the rough for anyone looking for a running back in day 2 of the draft. My number 3 running back in this year's draft class is David Montgomery from Iowa State. Montgomery is an effort, always going to give 100% player. He is pretty powerful and he has speed as well. I would say his biggest issue is his patience, his vision, and his awareness, which I think if he can improve that, which you can't really improve athleticism, but you can certainly improve both skills, and if he does that, I think he could be a really good player in the next level. My number 2 running back is Damien Harris from Alabama. Harris has been a very productive player the past few seasons for the Crimson Tide, but the reason why I'm not sold on him is I'm not sold on his upside compared to some of the other players in this year's draft class. He's not the most elusive and he's not the most athletic, but he's a stronger, bulkier running back. Going to be more of a power guy in the NFL rather than someone like Darrell Henderson or Justice Hill who uses their athleticism. But Harris is going to use his body, use contact to make big runs, which I think could be very useful for him. I think he should go in around the middle of the 2nd round, and that's probably where he will end up being drafted. My number 1 running back in this year's draft class is Josh Jacobs. This running back class is far from great, and in most running back classes, Jacobs would definitely not be number 1, but with the circumstances that we have, he is number 1. Jacobs doesn't have a super high ceiling, but I like his floor, and I don't think he will be a bust. He's not particularly a phenomenal athlete. He's not super fast, but he is patient. He's a good decision maker, good ball carrier vision, and I think he will be a very productive player in the NFL. I just don't see him as a superstar, but I don't really see any of these other running backs as potential superstars, and they have much low floors than Jacobs. This is a very deep wide receiver class. However, at the top, I don't think there are any potential superstars. But I think this group of 10, you could almost put in any order, and it almost still makes sense for most of them. So at number 10, I have Riley Ridley, the younger brother of Calvin Ridley, from the University of Georgia. Riley's not quite as good as his brother, not quite as much college production, but Ridley has incredible ball skills. He likes to use his body, and I think if he can improve with using his body, I think he could be a really good player. Not amazing with yards after the catch. He's not super athletic either, but he has good hands, and he's a pretty solid route runner. So I'm not huge on his ceiling, but I think he will be a productive receiver in the NFL. Even if that means not being a number 1 guy, I still think he could be a solid player. My number 9 receiver in this draft class is Paris Campbell from Ohio State. Campbell reminds me sort of Curtis Samuel, who came out of Ohio State just a couple of years ago. Samuel, I don't think will be a phenomenal receiver, but I like his versatility, and I think he could have a unique role on the offense. He's very fast and he's very athletic. He has solid hands, but is prone to drop a few. He had a great year for the Buckeyes this past season, and I'm very curious to see who gets him and how they will use him. Number 8 receiver is Lil Jordan Humphrey, without a doubt the best name, out of Texas. Humphrey is not the most consistent, but I like him after the catch. I like the plays he can make coming from that slot receiver spot. Doesn't have great hands and isn't a phenomenal athlete, but he knows how to make plays with the ball in his hands, and I think he could be a very intriguing prospect for a team looking for a new slot receiver. My number 7 receiver is JJ ARCEGA-WHITESIDE from Stanford, one of the more intriguing receivers in my opinion. ARCEGA-WHITESIDE has some pretty good hands, and he's a solid athlete, but he's not super quick. He is a relatively big guy, and he's a pretty good route runner, so I think he could contribute right away. Not super huge on his upside compared to someone like a DK Metcalf, who we'll go over in just a little bit. But I think he could be a really solid player right away, and I think he'll be a pretty decent player for a while. My number 6 receiver is HAKEEM Butler from Iowa State. Butler is a very big guy, 6'6", 225. He's a very good red zone threat. He knows how to make contested catches in traffic, on one-on-one or even one-on-two. He can moss cornerbacks, and he has solid hands. He's not super athletic, and he's not as good with the ball as someone like Lil Jordan Humphrey or Parris Campbell, but he can make big plays deep down the field, and he knows how to go upstairs where grandma hides the cookies, as I like to say. My number 5 receiver is KELVIN Harmon from North Carolina State. Harmon is pretty good at everything. He's not great at one skill, but I think he's a very well-rounded player and should be a solid player in this league. He has very good hands. He's a pretty solid route runner. He does need to work on his ability with the football. He's not particularly great at making big plays when he has the football. Not super quick or explosive, but I think if he can work on that and improve that, I think he could be a good player in this league. For these last 4 receivers, you could literally put them in any order. They're all that even, but they're all good at different things. So my number 4 receiver is Marquise Hollywood Brown from Oklahoma. I project him to go in that late first, early second round pick range. All 3 of my mock drafts, I had him going in the late first round to Oakland, which I think is a pretty good fit. Or, I shouldn't really call them Oakland since they're not going to be playing in Oakland next year, but you get the point. So, Brown is he's good at making big plays. He's very fast. One of the fastest receivers in this draft class. And he's a great deep threat, which is definitely his strength of his game. Not super big. Not particularly that type of guy like a HAKEEM Butler, like a DK Metcalf, who can go up and moss defenders, go upstairs where grandma hides the cookies. But he knows how to make big plays. He's pretty good with the ball in his hands, and he's a very solid player. He does need to work on his consistency, and he needs to work on his hands, which were sort of an issue in the college football playoff game against Alabama. But any given play, he could go down the field for an 80-yard score. My number 3 receiver is A.J. Brown from Ole Miss. Brown was debatably my number 1 offensive prospect heading into the season, and his stock did dip a little for me as well as other people, but I still view him as a first-round prospect. He is a phenomenal world-class route runner, which is by far the biggest strength of his game, and other than that, he's not particularly phenomenal at anything. He has solid hands. He's not phenomenal after the catch, but he's also not particularly bad. He has a pretty solid physical arsenal, 6'1", around 210, 215 pounds. He's not super fast, but he's also not particularly slow. And he also had to compete for targets along with DK Metcalf and DeMarcus Lodge, all of whom will probably be drafted. And Brown and Metcalf will both probably be first-round picks. So, I like Brown as a prospect. As I said, phenomenal route runner. Definitely the best route runner in this draft class. And he's the type of guy who would become an all-star with the New England Patriots and Tom Brady. So, I would be very intrigued by that fit. My number 2 receiver is DK Metcalf out of Ole Miss. I have mentioned him a lot the past couple of minutes. And we have looked at some receivers who have low floors, but also probably aren't going to be superstars like A.J. Brown, like J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, but Metcalf does have an extremely high ceiling. Definitely the highest ceiling for a wide receiver, but he also has a decent bust potential. Metcalf isn't super athletic, but he is somewhat athletic. He's very tall, very big frame. He can go up and make catches over defenders, go upstairs where grandma hides the cookies. He can make big plays, especially in the red zone, but there are some durability concerns with him staying on the field, which if he has trouble staying healthy, then that's going to make it very hard for him to live up to his potential, which is a big question mark. He has a good chance to be really good, but he also has a good chance to be really bad. My number 1 wide receiver is N'Keal Harry from Arizona State. The reason why I'm ranking Harry higher than the previous 3 receivers is that he is a complete player, whereas the other 3 are definitely not complete players. Harry isn't quite the route runner that A.J. Brown is, but he is still a really solid route runner. N'Keal Harry has phenomenal hands, doesn't drop a lot of passes, and when he's open, he's catching it 100% of the time. When he's covered, he can make big plays with it. He's pretty fast, and he's pretty explosive. So overall, there's not much that he's bad at, which is the main reason why I really like him. The only issue is he doesn't have the ceiling that someone like DK Metcalf has. Now we are on to tight ends. We're only doing 5 tight ends. And the number 5 tight end in this class, in my opinion, is Caleb Wilson from UCLA. Wilson has very good hands, which is by far the strength of his game. He's an okay, tad bit below average blocker, and he's not particularly athletic. I'm not saying he's not athletic, but he's not a great athlete, which I think as the NFL has evolved the past couple years, we're seeing more wide receiver builds at tight end, like Evan Engram example coming out of Ole Miss a few years ago. Really not a blocker at all, but very athletic for a tight end, more of a receiver, and he's been a pretty good player in his first 2 years with the New York Giants. But Wilson doesn't drop a lot of passes, and you can always find a big-bodied player who has good hands a role in this league. My number 4 tight end in this class is C.J. Conrad from Kentucky. C.J. has very good hands and is a pretty good route runner. My concern with him is his athleticism. He's not super athletic, definitely not super effective with the ball in his hands after the catch, and I have a feeling his stock could go down after the combine. He's an okay blocker, and I think he will be very underrated heading into the draft. I could see him going in around the 3rd or 4th round, which I think is pretty reasonable. I don't think his stock will dip too much from the combine, but I don't think he'll be a big winner. But if you look at the tape, his hands and his route running show that he can be a very effective player. My number 3 tight end is TJ Hawkinson from Iowa. I'm not as huge on him as other people, but I do still like him. He's pretty versatile, and overall, he's a very complete player. He's a good blocker, and he has good hands, solid route runner, and overall, he's just okay. I don't think he's great at any of those skills, but he's definitely not bad, which I don't particularly like his ceiling. But at the same time, I think he will, without a doubt, be a productive player in this league, and I think giving him a 2nd round grade is very fair. My number 2 tight end is Irv Smith Jr. from Alabama. Very similar to Hawkinson, he's a complete player, but I think he does have a higher ceiling. Irv Smith doesn't quite have the hands that Hawkinson has, but I think he's a better run blocker, he's a better route runner, and he's better with the ball in his hands, which I think that suggests a higher ceiling. He can improve his catching, but he can't really improve athleticism, and I think he's more of an athlete than Hawkinson, which is why I do have him higher than TJ. Not quite the athlete that Noah Fant is, but he's definitely no slouch. And speaking of Noah Fant, he is my number 1 tight end in this draft class. I am very huge on Noah Fant because of his athleticism and his upside. He is a really good receiver, not a great blocker. I mentioned Evan Engram not too long ago, and I think he's somewhat similar to Engram. I think he's also pretty similar to David Njoku and even Eric Ebron as sort of a vertical threat, but yet good with the ball in their hands. Not particularly a threat in the blocking game, but in the receiving game, he is has a chance to be one of the best in the business. Now we will be looking at the 10 best offensive linemen in this year's draft class. The number 10 one for me is Michael Dieter, I hope I said that right, from Wisconsin. I put him as a tackle, but I'd view him more as a guard. He is very versatile. He can play tackle, he can play guard, and he can play center. He's an experienced starter, and he seems more sort of comfortable, and he plays better in the inside, which I don't know why I put tackle, since that's not on the inside. But he's very versatile, which is the thing I like about him most. As I said, he can play all the positions on the O-line. He's pretty athletic as well, and I like his potential. The only biggest problem with him is I don't think he has a great floor. So either he's going to be a really solid player, or he's just going to not be that great. My number 9 offensive lineman is Darrell Williams from Mississippi State. He's a very different player, in my opinion, than, per se, Michael Dieter, as I think he's a better pure blocker. He's a physical player, but he's not a great athlete like Dieter is, and he's also not quite as versatile as Darrell Williams definitely won't be playing tackle in the NFL. I definitely view him as a guard, and while they're both very different players, I do like both of their upsides, and I think they could both be very good players. Number 8, we have Chris Lindstrom from Boston College. Lindstrom overall is a really solid player. He can block well in the run and the pass. I do like him a little bit more in the run game. I think he has a better technique there. And overall, I just think he's a well-rounded player. I don't think he'll be phenomenal in the NFL, but I do think he could be a good starter for a team looking for a good guard in the 2nd or 3rd round. The only center in my top 10 is at number 7, Elgton Jenkins from Mississippi State. Jenkins is not a phenomenal athlete, but I do think he is a really solid player. Despite him not being super athletic, he's a smart player. He's aware of who he needs to block and the situation, and he knows what he's doing. He's not going to make it easy for you getting to the quarterback or getting to the running back. And I think his smarts are one of the better parts of his game, which is why I think he will contribute right away. Not particularly huge on his ceiling, but I think he could be a solid starter day one. Number 6, we have Andre Dillard from Washington State. Dillard had a really solid Senior Bowl, which definitely improved his draft stock. He's an experienced starter for the Washington State Cougars. He's not the most pro-ready for his age as a redshirt senior, but I do think he has some upside and can develop within the next few years to become a good starter. I don't think he'll become a superstar, but I think he's an overall well-rounded player and could be a good player in the NFL. My number 5 offensive lineman is Dalton Risner from Kansas State, and the number 1 ranked non-offensive tackle. Risner can play tackle, he can play any of the offensive line positions, sort of like Michael Dieter, which is one of his big calling cards. I also think Risner is a really good pass blocker, which maybe a team would want to play him at left tackle. He can play left tackle, but personally I view him more as a guard. He needs to work on his footwork, which I think is one of his bigger issues, but other than that, he's good to go. My number 4 offensive tackle is Greg Little from Ole Miss. I don't like Little's ceiling as high as someone like Jawan Taylor, but all of these remaining offensive linemen, you could put them in any order, and it's Greg Little who happens to be the casualty at number 4. Most people would probably put him at number 2, but I like some of the other tackles just a little bit more, but I do really like Greg Little. He is very big, and he's very athletic with his size, and he uses his size to his advantage, but he's also somewhat raw. He needs to work on his technique, he needs to work on his IQ, and if he can do that, he'll be a great player, and I think he will be a great player, but I think there are a few offensive linemen who might be a tad better. My number 3 offensive tackle is Jawan Taylor from Florida. I don't know who to put higher, him or Greg Little, but I am choosing Taylor. You could put Greg Little, and I wouldn't really care. There's not too much of a difference in talent, I feel like. But Taylor is a little bit more athletic, in my opinion, and I do think he's also a better pass blocker. He's probably going to play right tackle in the NFL, and I think he can be a really good pass blocker in this league with his rare athleticism. And he does need to work on the rest of his game. He is still somewhat raw, but if he can, then he will be a home run selection for whoever drafts him. Number 2, we have Cody Ford from Oklahoma. Cody Ford, I have him a little bit higher than Juwan Taylor, and the only difference between them is versatility. As Cody Ford, he can play tackle as well as guard, whereas Taylor can really only play tackle. But like Juwan Taylor, Cody Ford is extremely athletic, debatably a little bit more athletic than Taylor, but I think Taylor's a tad more athletic than Cody Ford is. And he's also a really good pass blocker as well. Not quite the pass blocker that Juwan Taylor is, but he is a little bit more experienced than Taylor, and I think he will be a better player right away. Plus, he can play multiple positions. I think that could go very well to his advantage in the NFL. And at number 1, we have Jonah Williams from Alabama. Williams' stock did go down a little bit after the national championship against Clemson, but it didn't take too hard of a dive, and it did not remove him as my number 1 offensive lineman. Williams is a very smooth, very polished player. I think he will be phenomenal right away in the NFL. I'm not saying he's going to have a Quentin Nelson-like impact, but I think he's going to be excellent right away. I don't know if he has as high of the upside as some of the other guys we've looked at, but he's very polished, he's very pro-ready, he's very smooth, good technique, and overall he's a very well-rounded player. So that's it in my video and the podcast. Hope you all enjoyed. Next week we will be looking at defense. Make sure to like and subscribe. Hope you all enjoyed and have a great weekend.
I'm a Barbie girl in the Barbie world. Loving plastic, it's fantastic. You can brush my hair, undress me everywhere. Imagination, life is your creation.
Yo, hey, man!